good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Wherever and whenever you are watching this, we welcome you to the 19th episode of this International Human Resources Management, or IHRM, webinar series. Today, Helen De Cieri is leading a star-studded panel. Helen is a professor of management at Monash Business School in Monash University, Australia. Her work has been published in academic journals such as Journal of International Business Studies, Journal of World Business, Human Resource Management, Leadership Quarterly, and Safety Science. Helen's current research activities combine her interests in international HRM and employee health and well-being. She has extensive experience in co-design, collaborative, and impactful research projects with a broad range of industry and government partners. In a minute, she will be introducing our panelists, Betina Szkudlarek, Lauren Locklear, Paula Caligiuri, Sebastian Reiche. They will share their best practices, recommendations, and findings about translating IHRM research for practical impact. By the way, my name is Miguel Olivas Luján, and I am a professor of management at Pennsylvania Western University's College of Business. I have a few announcements before I pass the virtual podium to Helen. First, I want to highlight Helen's and Betina's extra effort as the live webinar is taking place in the middle of their night in Australia, where Monash University and the University of Sydney are located. So thank you so much, Helen and Betina. Of course, we're also very appreciative of the efforts that Sebastian is taking, from Spain, Lauren and Paula here in our good old United States of America. Secondly, this IHRM webinar series began in 2020 when the pandemic forced us to stay home and suspend conferences and many other scholarly activities. My colleagues, Mila Lazarova from Simon Fraser University in Canada, Elaine Farndale from Penn State in the United States, Marion Festing and Maral Poradbekovic from USP in Europe, and Maja Bidovic from RIT Croatia, and I started this webinar series inviting colleagues whose recent publications or conference presentations are influencing our field. We have been taking turns at different roles in the process of co-organizing this series, but special credit is due to Simon Fraser University in Canada, Mila Lazarova, and the team that includes Gerardo Arteaga, and also Penn State in the United States, Elaine Farndale and Cara Adrian. Without their resourceful centers and support, this series would have been much more difficult to organize. The last and very practical announcement is that we will be using the webinar's Q&A window to send questions, comments, suggestions, or reactions to Helen and our panelists. Please use it as you see fit. At the end of the presentations, we will do our best to share them and perhaps address at least those that we can within the 50-some minutes that we have reserved for this webinar. I will now turn the virtual podium over to Helen De Cieri, who will lead the panel today. Helen, once again, thank you so much for being with us. We have been looking forward to this panel for several weeks.
Thank you, Miguel, and hello, everyone. Before we start, I just want to mention that as an Australian, we always have a tradition of acknowledging the original Aboriginal owners of the land on which we meet. And I pay my respects to our elders in Australia and acknowledge that it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Also pay respects to elders and First Nations groups on wherever you may be located today, and welcome you to our seminar. Now, you probably all know and maybe share the experience that increasingly as scholars we're being asked to show evidence that our research has impact, as we should, as management and business scholars, show what we're contributing to the world beyond academia. And the people we've got on the panel today have so many wonderful examples to offer you to think about how to do it, how to engage with industry partners, how to talk in non-academic ways so that we see what's expected or required or needed beyond the academic community. And we also, recognise that increasingly governments in many countries and accreditation processes for business schools are looking for evidence that our research does have impact beyond the academic world. So let's get started for today. I welcome our speakers. Our speakers will speak each taking turns, and we ask you to put any questions into the Q&A webinar box, which you'll see along the bottom bar of your Zoom. And I'd like to firstly introduce Betina, who is talking about, her own experience and sharing with you the insights she has of engaging with industry partners. And I'll start off with Betina, then we'll go to Sebastian, who'll also talk about engaging with industry partners. Paula, who talks about, well, after you've done all that engagement and completed your research project, how do you talk to the media and engage with different diverse audiences? And then finally, we've got Lauren, who is just wonderful at social media and helping us to feel braver about doing all of the social media that is there for us to engage with and translate our research into really practical, non-academic talk. So I'll hand over to Betina, and thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Helen and Miguel, and welcome everyone. As Helen, I would also like to recognize the traditional owners of the land from which I speak today, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I also would like to pay my respect to the past, present, and emerging. It's an absolute honor to be here today and start and kick off this webinar. And it's not a coincidence I'm first, and that's because the way in which I'm going to start speaking about this particular topic is from the perspective of you do not have to be an expert. You do not have to, it does help, of course, but you don't have to know everything and be that face that is known or that name that is known for a given field of research. That's not where I was when I started. And I would like to therefore in some way encourage you not to be shy and just try your efforts today, because it might take a while. As we all know, governments work very slow, and it might take a while before you get to reach those decision makers that your research project is of relevance to. So when I started my research project, as I'm saying, I knew very little about refugee employment. That's the topic I am excited about. All I knew is that the whole world was talking about what has been labeled as the refugee crisis, and management scholarship wasn't doing much about it back then. And I said, well, I will. I don't know much either, but I have all the passion and enthusiasm. And I think this is exactly the attitude which I think brought me where I am today. And the whole point with which I started this research project back, about 7-8 years ago, is really trying to understand whose problem am I really trying to address. So as researchers, quite often we are so focused on advancing theory that we don't necessarily think about how is that advancement of theory going to address real problems with people out there. And I felt that in some way my ignorance about the topic was also an opportunity and a privilege to go out there and say, I don't know much, but I would like to help. What questions keep you awake at night? So it's really about understanding that the stakeholders, in my case, for example, policymakers, but businesses as well, trying to understand what is that keeps them alive rather than what keeps me as a researcher in terms of theory advancement awake at night. And then understanding what is the link to policy. For us, it really was about understanding that, we want to understand what drives employers to hire refugees. How could we encourage them to do more? And in research focus, you would see how the link to motivation would spring immediately. The question is, do policymakers want to know much about motivation? They do, but they would not label it as motivation. They would label it as incentives. They would label it as subsidies. They would label it as whatever support policies they have. So translating your research question from motivation to policy-making indicator is key. And it's actually much easier quite often than we think, because most of the work we do has really direct relevance for policymakers. So with that in mind, I needed to understand also what others have done in that piece, because a lot of credibility comes when you can go and say, yes, I know what you are already doing in terms of policymaking and refugee employment is XYZ. what I think is missing is this bit. And I know that, and this is the interesting point that I would like to make today, which is of relevance to every single person who is going to speak after me. I knew what was relevant because I connected, consulted, and confirmed with different stakeholders in the field about what they thought was the priority. So before I ever spoke to anyone within the government, I spoke to UNHCR, I spoke to peak settlement bodies, and I went to them and I asked them literally the question about what question would you like us to answer? How can we help you advance employment outcomes for refugees? And in this way, the government door was much faster open because they genuinely saw that we understood what concerns policymakers and other stakeholders within the field had. The next point, which is really interesting, is that there are various levels of government. So sometimes we kind of strive for the federal government, but maybe, regional, in different countries, those regional levels will have different names, might be the ones where the decision-making actually happens. And it's kind of interesting because, again, within this context, in Australia, different local governments will have different policies and they have a lot of independence of what they do. So you could actually pioneer something more locally with the government and only then try to expand to the federal level. Expect discontinuity, governments change, and what we discovered, that meant that I might have just built a relationship with this one person, and I was absolutely unaware that once the government changed or he or she changed the position, their email address has changed, and it's impossible to find the person back in the system. Be an opinion leader starting from the first day in a way in which you champion the cause, and people in your network, and Lauren is going to talk much more about it, people in your network see you as the champion for whom this is important and as someone who really cares about the impact that your research creates. And that means recognizing and promoting those who help you along the way in getting closer. For us, again, I did not reach out to the government directly. I had no links. I knew no names of whom to approach. When I spoke genuinely with different stakeholders and peak settlement bodies in Australia, some of them noticed the passion and enthusiasm, and they connected that link for me. I didn't even ask for one. They just genuinely thought, we think you might be, with the attitude of trying to help us, you actually would be great if you connected to the government because they need knowledge that you might be bringing. So again, the more you can show to the stakeholders you work with the genuine interest, even just like me, you have much less direct hands-on experience with the topic, and you are not yet that name known for it, the doors will be slowly opening. So with that point in mind, I really think it's just keeping in mind, how can you be relevant for and for which groups? The government will formulate what they need differently, then will the employers, then will, in my case, the settlement bodies. And trying to understand how to talk and meet the expectations of those different groups was key for the success of our project. If anyone has any questions and would like to, chat with me at another point in time, I would be very keen to maybe help you personally advance impact in this domain of connecting with government and policymakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Betina. There's so many things that I thought of as you were talking, just such really great advice. And next, we'll move straight on to our next speaker, who's Sebastian. And again, if any participants have thought of questions, you can put them into the Q&A chat in case you forget them very soon, given that some of us are up at strange hours of the night. I'll hand over to Sebastian now, who is, if you look at his own website, it shows you how experienced he is at working with corporations and at sharing his expertise in social media, such as his blog. So, and Lauren will probably correct me, and she knows that's not really social media, is it though? Anyway, I'm going to hand over to Sebastian now so that he can give you his perspective on approaching partners.
Thank you very much, Helen, Miguel, and team for hosting this. Also from my side, it's a big honor to be part of this. because really, if you think about us being management scholars, then really we are educators, right? And we are an applied science. And so I strongly believe that as educators, really academic impact and practical impact really are two sides of the same coin. They're very much reinforcing. And often we might be seeing this more as a yin-yang. These are opposite spheres that we sometimes struggle. Helen, as you mentioned this at the beginning as well. But really they are self-reinforcing, I would say. And I also think that there's really this myth that managers are not that interested in what we do. I think this is not true. I think they're very much interested. And from my own experience, the more senior people are who come to programs, the more interested they are. So you can actually have a very powerful impact on people coming through programs. Betina was mentioning, talking to policymakers. And so I'm at an institution where managers and executives are walking over the campus every day. So you see the campus in the background. So there's ample opportunity to talk to managers on a regular basis, on a daily basis. But even if you don't, there's many different avenues of how we can translate research into practical impact. And so I'm going to share my take on how we can do this. And to make this a bit more sticky, I thought I'll start with an acronym. So how do we achieve practical impact ASAP? And it's 4 steps. The first one is audience enlargement. So if we want to translate our research impact, we need to broaden our audience, right? And so one way to do this is, Helen, you mentioned, is writing a blog, writing LinkedIn articles. I've been writing a blog for the last 11 years now. I have to actually check when I started. Here's just a shot of that page. And this blog essentially is something that I would write once or twice per month on something related to expatriation or global work, but you can do this on LinkedIn as well. But this obviously has a very important precondition, which is you need to have an audience that actually listens or reads some of this work, right? And so this really has to do with how do you strategically develop that audience. So, for example, LinkedIn, I know that Lauren will talk about this more. Even if you teach different audiences, undergraduate students, at some point there will be managers, right? So as you connect after classes with students, you build your followers and readers on LinkedIn, you advertise your different avenues of how you share research. You'll be building your pool of your audience that you can talk to. So this is one thing. The other is how we're really not more searching for synergies between your research and teaching. I think that really has to do with how you align your research and your teaching agenda. So at the time when you think of a new research project, for example, is there something that you can also diffuse into the classroom? Maybe an exercise, an intervention, other things that lend themselves to also use in the classroom or with managers. Maybe there's even a book or book chapter or more applied article that you think of. Many universities these days are working with communication units who might even be drafting a short write-up of some of your research. We have an internal communications unit. We're working with some other magazines and newspapers. So sometimes it's really just identifying who these people are in your university, so they can actually help you draft a write-up. And even many academic journals now have other means and avenues for translating that impact. Searching for synergies also means thinking about which research projects would actually have practical impact. And I don't think this is quite that deterministic, but I've found myself over the past years thinking about whether with a new research project I can actually organize an alumni session or an open day for prospective candidates for a program, for example, with those findings. And so, for example, some of the pieces that I've worked with co-authors have come out of my teaching on global leadership, conversing with participants in programs that struggled, for example, with understanding what type of global leader they are. We've developed a typology and as a research paper, and this is something that I've brought back into the classroom. So that's been very synergetic. Or thinking about the paper that we had where we looked at identity orientations. I teach a lot of groups with biculturals or people with different cultural backgrounds. And whenever I bring in some of those findings, I feel that there's a lot of rich discussions on people's own role, social identities, and bringing in that research really stimulates those discussions. So these are research projects which at the inception stage already had this idea of how can we transfer that into practical impact. The third, the ASA, the second A, is about how you can more likely apply your research. Betina mentioned a great example, but this has to do with you identifying maybe also associations or small companies. You might see students who are setting up a startup that's related to your field of research. So you might actually help out, advise that startup in the inception stage, or as the company grows. This might be very much related to your research. So you can actually apply some of the findings on that organization. You might, at our institution, we write cases, teaching cases. We're expected to write teaching cases. And so, for example, as you conduct some interviews with managers for a case on an organization, these interviews might actually lend themselves to be an exploratory study for a research project you have in mind. So this might be your first step towards that research project. And using those interviews then for another research project might help you to create that synergy. And at the same time, again, apply some of your previous findings for that teaching case that you then might use in the classroom. For example, I've worked with a large company on 4 different cases, and these different interviews are currently work in progress, helping us to understand how organizations roll out practices in different country and cultural contexts. And the last point is about, well, I call this the practical impact loop. So rather than just envisioning how my research might kind of end up in a session, an alumni session, or an open day, or a program, I'm kind of thinking about how I can use the classroom as a way to stress test ideas. And so as I was thinking about how to visualize this for the webinar, I had to think of Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit. I don't know whether you know that book. And so he's developed this habit loop. And so here's my take on how you could do this to create more practical impact. If you think about starting a new research project, you might be developing your elevator pitch to talk at conferences, right? On a research perspective on how you sell your research idea among academics. Well, you could actually do the same thing with practitioners. And so what I often do with a new research project, I would develop my demo. I like music, so I use that metaphor as a demo, but it might be a prototype or really your elevator pitch of what's your key idea of a new research project. Once you have that, you actually have much more motivation to find opportunities where you could stress test that idea. And that might be a session, it might be a dinner with program participants, it might be an alumni event, where you're testing that idea with managers, with practitioners. This might not be the Shark Tank, but you get feedback. And so as you explain your findings or your expected findings, your research to managers, you get feedback on your idea. And that might actually help you to fine-tune your research. So that's synergy. You might find managers give you another perspective towards that phenomenon. So you might actually come up with a follow-up idea. So I think, again, this is very synergetic. And by going through this loop, the moment you actually develop your elevator pitch for a different audience, not just our scholarly audience, you'll be more motivated to find the opportunities to stress test. That's all. I'll stop here, but again, think about this loop really as something that we tend to do anyways, and then from a research side, we could and we should be doing this more with a practical or practitioner audience as well. So let me stop here. Thank you very much, and I'll hand over again to Helen.
Thanks, Sebastian. Writing down ideas as you're talking, thinking I should be doing more of this in my own research. But I absolutely agree with you that every step of the way in a research project should be thinking about how you engage with partners and what you can do to translate your research. Moving on to Paula as our next speaker. I'm sure, many of us in this field of international IHRM know Paula, and I think of Paula in some ways as someone who has been able to bridge doing really high quality research and translating that for audiences such as speaking to the media. So hand over to Paula. Thank you.
Helen, thank you. And I also want to thank the organizers. I actually want to thank everyone who's participating in this or eventually listening to this, because I personally can think of no more important issue that we have as a field than our ability to get our great knowledge out of the research journals and into practice. And Betina and Sebastian offered amazing advice, really spot on, in terms of how we can do that in a very practical way. My section is really on the media, on speaking to the media. And I think the reason I always get asked to do this particular piece, I spent 1.5 years on CNN with a regular segment. Just a little bit of background on that. It was an interesting conversation. I was in Atlanta. A friend had suggested, I had just written a book, a trade press or a popular press book on careers. And he suggested I speak with an executive producer. We had coffee. Her name was Nadia. We were 30% of the way through coffee, and she was already typing out a note on her phone to one of her bosses. And within 2 weeks, my friends, I ended up on CNN. So my first piece of advice: don't learn on live television. This happened very, very quickly. I've made tremendous mistakes. Unfortunately, most of them now live on YouTube. My first recommendation is that you practice doing podcasts. There's everybody and his or her brother have a podcast out there. We have lots of opportunities now as academics to do taped interviews. My strong recommendation is work through your challenges there. The second thing you can do is really ask for feedback. Your hosts, your executive producers, coaches, media coaches, they are skilled at how to be effective translating what we do for the audiences that we're speaking to. And the other thing I want to recommend is that we practice those short, non-academic answers. So let me just put it in perspective. Our typical academic article is about 10,000 words. The typical news segment is about 1.5 to about 2 minutes in length. The host or the anchor will be speaking about 30% of that, let's call it 2 minutes. The spoken word is about 125 words per minute, which gives you about 200 or so words of dialogue to say what you really want to say. And I promise, if anyone has ever done news, you know this, that the second the segment is over, you get this feeling like, oh, there's so much more you could have said. Of course there is. What we need to do as a field is get very, very comfortable both embracing these opportunities to be on media, but practicing a way to get the key issues out in an accessible way that people can use. Really, it is news you can use. So don't learn on live television, practice. Ask for feedback, use a coach, and remember, you really have to get it down into conversational, chunks. Okay, so the second thing is about the communication. Let me see if I can get us. Yeah, there we are. This is a very, very, very different language. As both Betina mentioned, as Sebastian mentioned, and I'm sure Lauren will mention, you want to test your ideas out on people who mirror your audience, not on academics. I adore my academic colleagues. I just think they are fantastic. They are not the ones who can give me advice on how to say something on media. So really think about, it's even maybe not managers. It might, if you're doing a news segment, it might be general audience. What do it's all about the audience. What do they need to know? And the next thing is really a challenge for all of us. We are trained in academia to own our area of expertise in a way that we give over expertise to others when, oh, that's not my area, that's so-and-so's area. I want to challenge all of us to say, you know what? We are experts. We are experts in management. We're experts in business. We're experts in management, and we could keep going. We're experts in HR. We're experts in international HR. But just because the topic isn't exactly on your specific area of research, the thing that you're publishing on, doesn't mean you can't comfortably offer some advice based on fact that can be useful and practical and relevant for your audience. So I'm going to really challenge all of us that when we get that call and say, hey, you know something about HR, can you make a comment on quiet quitting or whatever the issue is at the time, that you don't say, oh, no, that's not my area of expertise. You do know something. You know more than that audience, and you're an expert on this topic. So please, for the sake of our field, we all need to be, working in this way and saying, owning our area of expertise. Let's get out there. So the last piece of advice I want to offer is really about sort of where this fits in your academic career. I'm sure your institutions are much like mine. They value when we appear in the media, they value when we write an HBR article, like a pracademic piece or an org dynamics article. That's great. But media is different. I was surprised in my own career to learn that while it was appreciated, some people thought it was great, not all universities will be very excited if you're spending a lot of time doing media. So it is a time-consuming activity. If this aligns with your professional goals, I promise you it is worth the effort to learn how to be good at this, but also make sure it aligns with what you want to do with your career, especially in terms of, for those of you who are, going up the tenure ranks, make sure it aligns with what your university wants you to be spending your time doing. Now, that said, right, the universities may or may not value the time you're putting into engaging with the media. They might. At the same time, those higher up in the university will love that you're all in the media and spending time in the media. Use that to your advantage. As Lauren will share about, tagging in social media and making sure your university knows exactly what you're doing in terms of your interactions and engagement with the media. But just don't assume that this is a valuable way to spend your time, especially for those of you who are not yet tenured. It's time consuming, and to do it well, it really does take some effort. So those are my 3 lessons learned somewhat the hard way. Then I have just some practical tips. And this is actually this picture for those of you who have access to LinkedIn Learning. I just did another course for LinkedIn Learning on building cultural agility. That course should be coming out in the next few weeks. And I'm sharing this picture because LinkedIn Learning, my first course with LinkedIn Learning was in a studio. It was beautiful, lights, producers, everything. It was fantastic. Because of COVID, they had us move to remote packages. So everybody was remote, the producer, the director, the sound engineer, everybody remote. The only person, this is my condo. In fact, it's the table that we're seeing right now. They sent over $100,000 worth of equipment, lights and everything else. I'm sharing this because it matters. The makeup, lights, if you want to do this, you can pick up lights for $100 on Amazon that will make your experience much better in terms of what you look like in these remote packages. Makeup is also really quite important. So makeup, even for you guys, a little bit of powder doesn't hurt. And also those lightings. If you've never done this before, usually what happens with packages, news packages, is that your producers will call you before you're actually interviewed. Producers will ask you all kinds of questions. Basically, they're shaping the segment for the anchor. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because it surprised me the first few times. I will have incredibly deep, rich conversations with producers, and the anchors might ask entirely different things. So as an example, I was on, it was Richard Quest's show, and I was supposed to do something on salary surveys and equity and compensation. And we had this great conversation, the producer and I, great conversation about equity and comp. I got onto the segment on live news. First question out of the gate was, "Oh, Paula, do tell us why Americans are so obsessed with their compensation." not at all what I thought I was talking about, but guess what? It's live television. That's what you're having a conversation on. So just be a little bit prepared that it might not unfold exactly as you, and don't let that knock you off your game. The other thing that you have to realize, anchors and hosts, they too need to appear as prepared and as having some area of expertise. And sometimes they can ask questions that are quite long that actually steal your punchline or your what you were going to emphasize. And sometimes experts will fall into the trap of just agreeing with the anchors. Remember, you can take what they just said and extend it. Take what they said and extend it. Don't just agree with the anchors. Practice not moving. Maybe this is more my problem than anyone else's, but I have this tendency to move a lot. I had to be trained to not, and actually I have to remind myself even right now. And then the last thing I'll mention is that it's so easy to be distracted by what's ever on the screen, especially if you're the one on the screen and you're watching yourself. Ignore it. Only look at the camera. Think of those cameras as the set of eyes of your prototypical audience member, your best friend, your mom, your partner, whatever. Think of that camera as a set of eyes. The media is really a person-to-person medium. So we want to be able to almost kind of get out of the screen and into someone's kitchen or living room or whatever. Anyhow, those are the 5 practical tips. I'll leave it here and pass it over to Lauren, who will give us all kinds of great advice on how to push this information out there in the social media world. I will say, if you can spell my last name, you can connect with me. I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. So if you can spell my last name, you can find me. I hope we can connect. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula, for a really great presentation and helping us to consider, and we always should, whenever you get a call from the media, think about how you're going to respond, plan it, be prepared to say words in very concise statements. It's different from presenting in any kind of academic forum, and it's a great challenge for many of us, but an important one to practice, and it's a way of communicating your research and reaching audiences that might be your funding bodies in the future. So thank you for that, Paula. And I'm now going to hand over to Lauren, who is going to make social media look easy for everyone, even me. Thank you, Lauren.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having us all here today. Thanks to the speakers that started us off and gave us a good head start on talking about social media. So today I want to tell you a high-level overview of using social media to share and translate your research. And when I was invited to do this talk at Academy, it told me that maybe I should spend a little less time on Twitter. So in that spirit, because everything is good in moderation, today we'll also talk briefly about balance as well. So let's start off with what even is a web presence? What is a social media presence? In my view, a web presence has 3 components. It's somewhere for people to find you, to figure out who you are and what you do. It's also somewhere to tell your scientific story. So what is it that you research? Why did you come to research it? Why do you think it's important? And it's somewhere for people to access your work, whether that's the actual PDFs of your articles, or whether that's the blog posts you write like Sebastian, or whether that is press releases that come out from your university. And so there are several places for us to have this social media presence. The first of which that everyone should have as an academic, I think, is Google Scholar. And this is a place to link to your research articles that people can find places to cite you and see your entire body of scholarly work in one place. So if you haven't yet taken control of your Google Scholar website, I definitely suggest doing that today. It's really simple to link it to your Gmail account. The next up is a personal website. And this is a place to house your basic information, somewhere for someone to lift your bio if you're giving a webinar or a talk, a place to house your most recent CV, and also to link to your work, whether that's, to the APA website or to the Wiley website, or actually to host those PDFs on there. And then, as Sebastian mentioned, a place to host a blog. Sometimes there are pieces of information that we want to share that aren't really a full publication, or maybe they're a how-to that you think is important. For instance, I wrote up a how to do a literature search for my PhD students at Texas Tech. And I figured, this might actually be helpful for other people beyond students just here at my university. So I hosted that on my blog and then shared the link to that on Twitter, and it was pretty well received. So there are lots of things you can write about on your personal website and take advantage of that blogging space. You can also do something like get a Medium website as well. So a shared space to blog as well. We then have ResearchGate. ResearchGate is another way to share the PDFs of your articles. But in my view, ResearchGate is important because it can lower some barriers that individuals might have if, for instance, their university doesn't have access to the journals that you publish in, or perhaps if individuals aren't affiliated with a university and maybe they are trying to write up a press release or they're trying to write a blog post about your work. So this is a great place to host some of your research all in one place. My personal favorite is Twitter. So you can use Twitter to do a number of things. You can hang out in the academic Twitter space, and you can use this to share summaries of your work. So in my view, Twitter is great because it forces you to, in 280 characters, extract the most important piece of your research, really boil it down to what I call the golden nugget, and you can only share just that. You can also use Twitter to announce your accomplishments and celebrate the accomplishments of others. We know that academia is a space with a lot of negative feedback, a lot of rejection, and there's not always a ton of celebration. So using social media to celebrate yourself, even the small wins, and celebrate with others is, I think, really important and a really fun part of social media. I also think it's important to mention that you can do things like threads. So threads are links of tweets all together with, a common theme. So it's a good way to summarize your articles for an academic audience. You can use academic hashtags and tag others, like Paula mentioned. And it's a good way to connect with others inside and outside of your network. So academics in your domain, but also in other domains like psychology and sociology, but also with practitioners and people who are just interested in your work from a popular press perspective. And then we have LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is a great place to connect with practitioners and academics alike, especially through LinkedIn blog posts, LinkedIn posts that are not just from your blog, but sharing other people's work, sharing your own work. And then finally, we have TikTok. So although I'm not personally on TikTok, it's a great place to do science communication. Some of my favorite people on Twitter are also on TikTok, sharing really cool research and making 2 minutes of the most fun piece of research I've ever seen, way better than those 10,000 word articles that we were watching. So if you're brave, I encourage you to go out and spread the word of our research on TikTok as well through maybe a fun dance or even just a quick tell me like I'm 5 version of an article. So why should you use social media? We did the what, now why, and we'll finish with how. So you should use social media for a few reasons. First, so people can find you. Like I said, this is a place to have a web presence so people can find out who you are and what you do. It's a great place to show off for employers if you're on the job market, if you're a doc candidate, to collaborate and find collaborators. Also, if you're looking for students to recruit, they can figure out who you are, the kind of research you're doing. And you can also find consulting and speaking opportunities by having a web presence. So I was tapped by the North Dakota Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Association to give a talk on gratitude and appreciation in the workplace because they were able to read some of my popular press articles and find my work on my personal website. Another thing is that social media can help you to increase your impact. research shows that when we tweet out our articles or share them in popular press outlets, that we have more reads and more citations of our articles. In fact, a randomized controlled trial took equally impactful articles and tweeted out some of them and did not tweet others, and found that the ones that were tweeted out had almost 10 times more reads and citations at the end of, I think it was a 5 or 10 year period. And you can also join a community and a conversation. So academia can sometimes be a long, lonely field. So we can find places to ask questions. We can find symposia contributors. I love to be like, hey, I'm organizing a thing. Can someone join? And someone's always there to answer and say happily. You can keep up with new research, especially 280 characters at a time. It's a really efficient way to know what's going on in the field. And you can make friends. I love my online friends who have turned into in-person friends. And it's a great place to network with others out there. So how is a completely up to you decision. So everything in moderation, I always say, but if going on to share your articles is something that you're comfortable with, or if you're only comfortable with having a Google Scholar, that's a personal decision. But I might mention 2 words of caution. The first is shared by my very funny person that I follow on Twitter named Caleb. He says that part of being online and remaining sane is letting some trending topics wash over you like water. Simply saying, this one I won't research. I won't know about this one. This is true of academic Twitter as well, of academics generally. There's always some type of information or drama out there, and you don't have to be part of it. You can turn off social media for the day. You can block a person if they're being toxic. You can make social media whatever you want it to be. So don't feel like you have to be part of every little debate. And I will also say, please be kind to others. Each day on Twitter, there's one main character, and the goal is to never be it. So if you are the topic of conversation for the day on social media, that is probably a problem. So think about what you are sharing very clearly before you do so, since this is your public presence. And you don't have to share everything that you think necessarily. So just being really cautious and being kind to others. So in the spirit of social media, follow me on Twitter if you want to connect. I would love to invite you to colloquiums or to seminars and webinars and connect with you on social media in other ways. You can also check out my website or shoot me an email. I would love to connect that way as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. And thank you to everyone for joining in with us. Just a quick comment. I'll hand over to Miguel to share the save the date.
Thank you, Helen. The next webinar that we will be having on Thursday, November 17, on the next installment of our IHRM webinar series. As you can see on our screen, Professors Margaret Schaffer and Mihaela Dimitrova from Vienna University of Economics, the latter, and from University of Oklahoma, the former, will be sharing with us Adjustment Reimagined, a presentation on expatriate adjustment and other expatriate experiences. Everyone in the field of international HRM is aware of the literature on expatriates and the challenges they face. So please join our next webinar to reimagine what the literature on expatriates might look like in the future. And there's a QR code on the screen. We will be posting a link on the, actually, Mila has already posted it on the chat or the Q&A window so that you can join us. The link will be sent to you 24 hours prior to the beginning of the webinar, just like today. If you are unable to join us live during the seminar, also register to receive the link to the recording a few days later. You may also visit our YouTube channel. That is where we are posting the webinars for the benefit of our discipline, of our students, of our colleagues. The webinars are posted 1 or 2 days, actually, usually 2 or 4 days after the event, the live event takes place. So back to you, Helen, for questions and answers, since we still have about 6 or 7 minutes before the hour is over.
Great. Thank you. Well, thank you all for the questions. We might go over time if anyone wants to stay around. There's 2 questions from David, and I'm going to try and join them in together. The questions are about how do we really bridge the academic and practitioner gap. There are several articles where researchers and scholars have offered ideas, and you'll see, those articles in academic journals, but bridging the academic and practitioner divide, I think we've talked about it a little, but I'd like to combine that with David's other question. How do we perhaps learn from people in other disciplines about how they bridge that divide? And I think many other disciplines, particularly in areas like health and engineering and IT, have been really good at giving us examples for how we can really engage with industry. In my own experience, I do a lot of research collaborating with health academics, but also with IT academics, with people in, a couple of disciplines in science, for example, and colleagues in education. And I've learned so much from them. They're the people from whom I learned about research translation and how to get industry bodies to fund their research, often by, directing it to public health and the sort of social agenda that can hopefully be contributed to by management scholars. But do any of the other panelists have any ideas that you haven't already mentioned so far about how to learn from other disciplines and how to bridge the academic practitioner divide? Sebastian's got his hand up there. Thanks, Sebastian.
No, so I guess if you think about the other applied sciences like medical, law, most of these scholars also work. Right? As a medical doctor, you have a practice. As a lawyer, you have a law practice. So I guess we need to be more in the field. We need to, whether this is as a consultant, as a coach, again, in an advisory role. I mean, maybe sometimes this is looked down upon because, well, we should be doing this for research purpose. I think that's very important. But I think at the same time, again, there's a lot of input that we can gain from this. And I think that's what we ought to do.
Yeah, that's a great example. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving on to answer the next question. There's a question for Paula from Judy, which was, do you think your ideas for communicating with the media also applies to writing for popular articles?
Yeah, absolutely. It's thinking about the audience out, instead of, I think oftentimes when we write as academics, we want our great ideas because we, have a way of thinking about them without thinking about how they're necessarily going to be put into action. So it's actually just reversing that logic and saying, okay, how do I write this article that it can be the most practical and useful possible for the person who will be reading it, and then start writing, right?
Yes, it's a great point. Does anyone else want to? Lauren's got her hand up there. Go, Lauren.
If I might add to that, I would also say that it really is a different muscle that you're flexing oftentimes. And we have to think about storytelling, I think, as a mechanism to really translate our research for practice, and especially thinking about actions first or ideas first. So thinking, how can a practitioner really take this? What can a manager do with our information? So writing for MIT Sloan or HBR, it's like, 3 sentences or 4 sentences about what you did. And the whole entire rest of the article is how can a manager use it? And it's completely opposite of what we do, because our practical implication sections are usually 3 sentences or 3 ideas total. And so really feeling that you have the liberty to expand and think about how your ideas can be used in practice, I think is really important, and something that can feel a bit uncomfortable when you're just starting out.
Yes. And Betina has also got her hand up. You're next, Betina.
If I can add, based also on the question before about the divide, I don't think there is a divide. I think, we construct it as a divide. I think the whole point of doing research is that we want to make a difference, that we want to make things better. And it happens that we also contribute to theory. So for me, the growth of knowledge, the contribution to theory is because there is an important so what that we have to answer. So I think if we reframe our mindset from, micro advancement of theory to making a difference, which is what we deep down inside all strive to do. And that's why we are academics. I think that's where we will see much less of this problem of how we talk and present our work. So yeah, there is no divide. That's what we do. That's what our work is about.
I love that. I think we're all working very hard to deal with that and bring others along on the journey. That's why we're here. We've got another question from Julia asking, how do you grow your Twitter network, especially your number of followers? Lauren?
I think this is a great question, and it's kind of twofold, I would say. I think this happens organically as you follow others in your network, follow the topics that you're interested in, but also as you add to the conversation. So following you should be a value add, that you should be sharing your research or sharing other people's research, finding sort of your own niche on Twitter or on social media. And I also think it just happens over time. Some of these things are a slow trickle as you network with people at conferences, as you figure out what your research area is. And so I think partially it's being intentional and following the people that you're interested in and sharing information that you think is important. And then it's just organic and happens over time.
Thank you. Sebastian's got his hand up again. Thank you, Sebastian.
So I guess I just wanted to zoom out a bit more and just reiterate that there's, again, also very important synergies with once you have that practical impact. I think sometimes we feel that distilling one paper into just a couple of seconds, or you're not going to do a full class or 3 hours on that paper. That's true, but the idea still is very, very powerful. And if we need more incentives to do this well, I think one is if we do this regularly, there's many data access opportunities, right? So if managers actually listen, you have access to their organizations, to very interesting research samples. And I guess the alternative is someone is doing the practical impact. And if we as scholars are not doing it, it's the consultants doing this who don't have research training, who don't do rigorous and robust research. So I guess we have to kind of weigh up what the alternative is. So better we do it than we leave it to others.
Yes, and there are lots of ways to do it. It's not just Twitter. It could also be, for example, partnering with industry partners. I partner with a management consulting firm. They do programs they design for the organisations, and my team do the evaluations of their programs. So we have a very practical contribution to the way that they do their work. You can also do things like, when you're wanting to engage an industry or a partner or a funding body, do research on them before you ever meet with them. Know what they've been about in the past. Look them up in their social media. Look at the individual you're talking to and look at CEO statements for their company and learn about what issues are important to them, so that when you present your business case for doing research with them, you're addressing needs and you're saying to them, I can make your life easier because I know that your organisation sees this as a really high priority. So yes, it's getting the message out. Also make sure your own website has information that will appeal to the audience you want to target. And I find that really important because I work across 2 fields. And so I try to make any website have a mix of the research that I do, so I'm not locking out one audience if they're searching for someone who researches in a given area. We could cover lots more questions, but I can see how close we are. We're just a couple of minutes over time. We can keep going. Friends, are you happy to keep going? Okay, we'll keep going.
If you want to address another question or two, please be our guest. I'm loving this interaction, and any additional ideas that we can share amongst ourselves and our audience, please, by all means, don't feel rushed.
Yeah. So I'll stay here. We'll stay here for another 5 minutes or so, see how we go. This is better than teaching a class. My students are much more quiet than everyone is here. No, they are lovely and it's wonderful. And I think it's particularly important to think of them as another way of getting your research out to practitioners. If you're teaching MBA students, you discuss their problems and what's happening in their organisations. You work with them. You continue to engage with your alumni, and that often can lead to research opportunities and ways of engaging with them. There's also more questions. Just thinking of a question that's here. It's a long list, so I'm trying to find it. I guess for each panelist is a question around, what was your biggest challenge? Were there barriers that you had to overcome when you were trying to improve your, or to contribute to research impact? I know Paula mentioned that your university might not be as supportive of things as you might like them to be. But starting with Betina, do you have ideas that you're willing to share about what were the challenges that others might face as well?
I think when it comes to really applied research with relevance, there will be some people within the university who will not see the relevance of your work at all, because if they are, focused on theory, your applied research will be seen as not, fancy, sophisticated enough for academia. And I find that there is this interplay between we are still academics, which means showing impact with terms of, research that makes a difference is going to get them converted. And I think what I noticed within my university, when we pitched for the first project on, refugee workforce integration, the panel that was anonymous within the university was ruthless. Some people were, making comments, this is not really, academic research, this is not going to lead to anything. Now that the recognition came and the papers are published, it's so much easier to get any resources. So I think it takes time to build credibility, and it's both within the university, but also, and I will stress, Lauren's part of the presentation in terms of outreach and social media, credibility within your networks and who you present yourself as an expert, who do you champion as an expert? Because social media, for me, is much, and I'm learning, it's much less about promoting myself, but much more about championing others and building meaningful connections through those channels. And that's how I, for example, one of the founders for my last project found me on LinkedIn, followed my, my work on LinkedIn and said, I would like to work with you. So again, it's a kind of a little bit of a work in progress. It doesn't happen overnight, but I think if you can show your colleagues, yes, this is impactful on all the levels, then everyone become envious and they want to do what you are doing.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any challenges that you've managed to overcome?
Actually, this could be linked to a question posted by Arne Einarsdottir, who asks, Lauren, is there a reason why you did not mention Facebook?
So I can speak to both of those questions. The first, I know a lot of doctoral students often are on these webinars. And so I think especially as a doc student and as an early career researcher, a lot of times you might get the credibility question, or your advisors might be like, you're on social media, you should be doing research. So I would say that in terms of figuring out what are the things that are rewarded for you as a doc student, as an early career researcher, and making sure that, of course, you need to be doing what makes you happy and what is going to help push your research and your impact forward. But also you do want to be allowed to graduate and you do want to get a job and everything. So there is a fine balance and a fine line. Oftentimes, one of my advisors was really into science communication and really pushed me to do some of the science communication that I've done to this point. And one of my other advisors didn't always think that that was one of the most important pieces of being a doc student. And so there is figuring out the people who are going to support you in your science communication journey. And so it's a very, you have to navigate in a tightrope sometimes. In terms of the question about Facebook, I think Facebook can be a great place to make a community and to find your people. I know one of the things that I'm oftentimes active in is the Women of OB Facebook group for faculty in OB that are women. And I think that's a great place to find community to get your questions answered that you may not ask elsewhere. But I don't always think of it as a place for science communication, only because it can be sometimes a sound chamber for you and your people. But not to say that it couldn't be. It's not something I personally use, but social media is sort of a to each their own. And if you can build that following and that network on Facebook, more power to you. I totally encourage that.
Paula, could you please answer the question from Cordula in the Q&A? And then after that, we'll wrap up, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, so the question was around, really, it sounds like it's the issue around, how do we still make some time for media and other social impact involvement? We only have 24 hours and our institutions really value our research. How do we kind of make the time for this? If I'm understanding the question correctly, I had the exact same issue. One, I think Lauren had said it well. You can spend a lot of time getting lost in the social media side and in prepping for these interviews and the like. It's way too time consuming for us as academics. I mean, we still want to advance the field with research. My recommendation and what I ended up doing was I carve out in the morning about between 45 minutes and an hour, and that's my limit. If I have to prep for an interview, that's the time I give myself. If I'm going to be active on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever, that's my period of time. I just made time for it, and I will agree with what everyone has said. It is worth it in terms of client interactions, consulting opportunities, funding opportunities, the recognition within the university. Again, you have to sometimes win them over, as Betina beautifully illustrated. Sometimes you have to win them over, but that little bit of effort is worth the time.
Great.
Well, thank you so much. Truly appreciate Helen, Betina, Sebastian, Paula, and Lauren for these inspiring and thought-provoking presentations. I really appreciate also everyone who joined us today, or anyone who will be watching this webinar at a later time at your convenience. I'm already looking forward to the next webinar on November 17, 2022. Please join us at your earliest convenience and enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Miguel, and thank you all of the organisers.
Appreciate that, Helen.